Before he died, Walt Disney left everyone with a final message. It's a small world. Love it or hate it, it's a ride that calls for a sense of unity. It was the final Disneyland ride opening ceremony that Walt Disney himself attended before his death, and as such, was a fitting message to summarize Walt's life. A life he dedicated to the happiness of the young and the young at heart. The year is 1963, and Walt Disney and his team of Imagineers at WED Enterprises were called upon by the companies of Ford, General Electric, and even the representatives of the state of Illinois to produce attractions for the New York World's Fair. The sponsorships provided by these entities would go towards not just the construction of the famous landmark attractions, but even to the advancements in three-dimensional animation that Walt Disney called audio animatronics. The Imagineers were close to finishing these three projects and getting them ready for the fair when a call came to Walt Disney rather last minute. On the phone were representatives of the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, otherwise known as UNICEF. UNICEF provided important emergency amenities to the children of the world, and in an effort to promote and raise funding for their organization, they decided to create a pavilion at the fair. However, UNICEF was having problems finding a sponsor that would create something for them, until they called Walt Disney. Walt was a frequent donor to the organization, and when he learned that they wanted a spot in the fair, he moved heaven and earth to make it happen. All UNICEF expected was some kind of walk-through exhibit, but they had no idea the bounds of Walt Disney's imagination. Long story short, Walt had relationships with Pepsi-Cola, who often sold their own products at Disneyland. He convinced Pepsi to sponsor an attraction at the fair, and that's when Walt went into the Imagineering offices for a surprise meeting. Speaking to Dick Irvine and Rolly Crump among several others, Walt's wish was simple. He wanted a boat ride that took guests around the world to see the different nations and their children, and it had to be ready in less than 10 months. Of all the technologically advanced attractions that were being made, with incredible sets and world building, it seemed odd that all Walt wanted was a little boat ride. Roland Crump was a very imaginative artist, but his designs weren't quite what Walt was expecting. So Walt turned to Mary Blair because he loved her color stylings and childlike artwork. That being said, when it comes to Disney movies, Mary's art can be seen in animated films such as Song of the South, Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, and Peter Pan. She was also sometimes brought in to work on projects for Disneyland. Mary's artwork often featured children as its subject, and her artistic style very much reflected the innocence and childlike qualities that people held within them. She was a perfect fit to design and create It's a Small World. Rolly Crump was then asked to assist Mary in the design of the ride, but Rolly also had a special project of his own. You see, the ride had to be built on such a small budget and short time frame that there really was no time to design some kind of beautiful artistic facade for the show building at the fair. So instead, Walt asked Rolly to create a type of iconic art piece that could be seen from all areas of the fairgrounds and draw people towards the ride. Rolly was known around the office for creating little mobiles and propellers that decorated his workspace, so he decided that the structure he wanted to create was a tower with spinning mobiles and propellers, which were powered by the wind. The idea was that the kinetic movement of the different decorations of the structure would draw the curious eyes of visitors to the fair. He called this structure the Tower of the Four Winds. His designs were sent to the manufacturer, and the quote they gave Walt Disney for the cost of production on the tower had far exceeded Pepsi's budget, so Walt paid for the tower out of his own pocket. Rolly Crump and Walt took a trip to see the completed tower to sign off on it. When Rolly saw the tower with his own eyes, he hated it. You see, the original designs for the tower were to have metal frames and poles that were thin and narrow to give the structure a look of delicacy. But the manufacturer felt that the designs were too delicate, and that under strong winds, the tower might be at risk of damage or collapse. So the diameter of the support poles and framework were increased to twice their designated size, making the 120-foot tall tower weigh in at a staggering 200,000 pounds.
Roland and I went down and gave it a final dry run.
We subcontracted to a company, engineering company here in Los Angeles, and I had to drive Walt down to take a look at it, and which we did. And Walt turned to me and said, "Well, what do you think, Rolly?" It's a piece of crap. And he said, Rolly, it can't be a piece of crap. He says, it cost me $250,000. And he loved it.
Audio animatronics weren't the only technological advancements made at the fair. The sponsorships for these attractions allowed WED Imagineers the budget to experiment with new technologies that can eventually be brought back to Disneyland. One of the things WED was able to work on were engineering designs that allowed for high-capacity rides. The fair would get more visitors than Disneyland on any given day, so rides and attractions had to be able to accommodate around 3,000 guests per hour. Disneyland had no attractions at this time that could meet that kind of demand. Imagineer Bob Gurr was brought in to consult with the ride manufacturer Aero Development in order to create attractions that could meet this demand. With their help, he built ride systems like the massive rotating theater of the Carousel of Progress, or even the invention of the People Mover system in use at Ford's Magic Skyway. So when Walt said It's a Small World had to be a boat ride, there in itself was a new challenge. Boat rides had long been in existence in the form of log rides or tunnels of love, both of which had a potential of high capacity, but not enough. Aero had developed new water jet mechanisms that were relatively compact, yet could move high volumes of water very efficiently. This is what separated It's a Small World from other log flumes. Let me explain. A log ride generates an artificial water flow using the exciting waterfall plunges on the ride. These thrilling drops keep the water moving in a consistent direction. But It's a Small World wasn't going to have thrilling drops, and the types of water pumps in a Tunnel of Love type attraction were primitive. The pumps were huge and hard to transport or maintain, because there were usually less than 4 of these and they required lots of space for sucking in water and pumping it out. But the little water jets that Aero designed could be removed and replaced during maintenance, almost like changing the batteries on a flashlight. And if one pump broke down during operation, the other numerous pumps along the ride path still generated enough flow to keep the ride moving for the rest of the day. This contrasts with a Tunnel of Love type ride because if one of their pumps stopped working, a whole section of the ride would come to a stop. The compact water jets created by Aero Development allowed Bob Gurr to design large boats with 5 rows of seating, a capacity of 18 passengers, far exceeding the boat size of any high-capacity water flume ride in existence. The boats and everything in the ride had to be built and manufactured in Los Angeles, which meant that it had to be built so it was easy to transport. The flume itself would be constructed like a porcelain bathtub. They started with a base of steel formed in the shape of the flume, then a porcelain enamel coated the whole thing to make it waterproof and easy to clean. To protect the sides of the flume from the boats scraping against it and causing unsightly wear and tear, Bob had the flume manufactured with a deep trough in the center, where the guide wheels at the bottom of each boat could steer the boats along and keep them away from the sidewalls. He got this idea from another ride at Disneyland he helped create, called the Motorboat Cruise. With time running short, the Imagineers working on the interiors of the attraction had to overcome some design obstacles. Immersive environments took time to create, and designing individual animatronic figures took even longer. Mary had the idea that instead of creating realistic environments and realistic animatronics, the whole ride would be designed to look like an arts and crafts project put together by the children of the world. And the children seen in the attraction can be represented with dolls as opposed to lifelike figures. That way, each doll could be the same size and shape as one another, and all they had to do was differentiate them by skin tone and costumes. And since there was no time to animate and program each individual figure, the children would be programmed into groups, all performing the same simple movements as a group. One cluster of children could all be doing the same dance, while another bunch could all be playing the same instrument. And to create a little diversity of animation, once in a while an individual doll would be given its own exclusive programming. The programming of the dolls itself was simple. Each doll would perform no more than 3 functions, which usually included eye blink, arm movement, and either torso movement or leg movement. And while the more complicated animatronics such as Mr. Lincoln used hydraulic fluid to create smooth movement, the dolls and toys on It's a Small World were instead pneumatically powered, which means their movements were done with high-pressure air, just like the birds of Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room. The set pieces were created with various materials that children might make something out of, such as paper mache, paste, glitter, plastic jewels, ribbons, and even fabric. Large set pieces were made from various materials of strength, sometimes plywood, and the different sets and areas of the ride were separated by black curtains running from the ceiling down to the floor. It was very obvious then, and even today, that the ride appears like it could be boxed up for shipping in very little time, as if nothing in it is permanent. Today, guests sometimes comment that this makes the ride look cheap, but I myself see it as more of a characteristic quirk than a flaw. Nevertheless, whenever the ride is duplicated at other parks, Imagineering usually tried to give the ride a more permanent appearance. The job of creating costumes for the dolls was given to Imagineer Alice Davis. Alice had a wonderful talent for costumes and creativity. She started out creating a dress for an actress modeling Princess Aurora for the animated movie Sleeping Beauty, then fell in love with animator Mark Davis, and they soon got married. Walt was introduced to her and he took a liking to her talent, and she was officially hired into the studios in the year 1960. Walt eventually moved her into Imagineering, where she became a legend at costuming the animated figures for countless Disney attractions. You might be wondering why I'm focusing this part of the show on Alice. Well, before Disney's World's Fair attractions, there were no audio animatronic figures of humans at Disneyland. The closest thing to it were simple mannequin-type figures, and most of them didn't wear fabric. Alice had the daunting task of figuring out how to dress an animatronic figure that couldn't be disassembled for costume fitting, and the figure had to be dressed in such a way that hid unsightly mechanical features as well as could withstand constant movement day in and day out. It was Alice that figured out how to build costumes in sections that could be attached with various materials like snaps, Velcro, or zippers, and made to look like the characters dressed themselves. Think about it. How do you put shoes or pants on an animatronic that is bolted to the floor? Or slide a shirt sleeve over the arm of a Small World doll permanently glued to a musical instrument? If anyone could do it, it was Alice Davis. There was one last issue to solve before the attraction could open at the fair: sound. Originally, Walt wanted each country in the attraction to be singing their own national anthems. When the ride was nearly complete, they put all the sets together on a massive soundstage, all arranged in the same way they would be displayed at the fair. Then they put Walt in a boat on wheels and pushed him through the sets so he could experience the attraction the same way the guests would. When they turned on the soundtracks for the show, it was a cacophony of noise. All the different anthems sounded terrible when they were played at the same time. It was truly awful, and Walt quickly went to his studio songwriters Richard and Robert Sherman, otherwise known as the Sherman Brothers. You might know them for their catchy songs in the movie Mary Poppins, starring Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke. Walt simply said, "I need a song that is short, simple, and can be translated in many languages." This is where the magic of the Sherman Brothers shined. They wrote the song originally as a soft ballad. It had only 2 verses, and the chorus was catchy in every language.
It's a world of laughter, a world of tears. It's a world of hopes and a world of fears. There's so much that we share that it's time we're aware. It's a small world after all.
The music was altered to give it more of an up-tempo sound, and the lyrics were sung by a children's choir and recorded in different languages. When synchronized and played back, the music flowed flawlessly from scene to scene. Walt loved the song so much, he decided to change the name of the attraction from Children of the World to It's a Small World. It's a Small World had a very successful run at the New York World's Fair. It was the most popular attraction of the fair, which is odd considering its simplistic sets, figures, technology, and song. But that itself is exactly why it did so well. Simplicity is sometimes the most successful idea. When the fair ended, Walt had plans to transport all 4 of his successful attractions back to Disneyland. After all, they were entirely built and paid for, and they garnered a reputation. The only thing the company had to pay for was shipping them over. However, It's a Small World would end up being the most expensive of the 4 attractions to ship back to Anaheim. You see, there was no room in the park to fit the attraction. Also, there was lots of boats, set pieces, animated figures, props, and even the porcelain water flume to carry back. To create room in Disneyland, Walt had to expand the northern part of the park. Here you can see that Fantasyland ended at the railroad tracks at Fantasyland Depot. A triangular area was cleared north of that to expand the boundary. The railroad tracks would pass through the facade of It's a Small World, and guests would experience the ride in the show building, which was located beyond the park's new boundary. Once again, Walt called upon Mary Blair and Rolly Crump to design the new facade and even add some new sets and scenes into the ride. And at the ride's entrance would be the Tower of the Four Winds.
My boss, Dick Irvine, calls me in and he says, Rolly, you're going to put you on the hot seat. So I went to the office and all the vice presidents were in the office. Dick Irvine said, you know, we don't want to bring the Tower of the Four Winds back to Disneyland. And I said, well, neither do I. And they said, well, we want you to tell Walt. Get this, I'm a guy in a pair of Levi's and a sweatshirt, and here's all the vice presidents in their ties and suits, and they don't want to tell him. And then finally at the end, Walt said, is that it? And I said, Walt, I said, about the Tower of the Four Winds, and the eyebrow would go up. And he says, what about the Tower of the Four Winds? And I said, I don't want to bring it back. He says, what do you mean you don't want to bring it back? He went to every one of those guys and said, are you concerned about the cost of bringing it back? Well, at that point in time, Walt knew that I had been set up. The man was absolutely brilliant. So he said to me, he says, okay, we won't bring it back.
Mary Blair's design for the new ride facade would be a layered, two-dimensional artistic rendering of icons from the world's nations. Some can easily be seen, such as Italy's Leaning Tower of Pisa, or France's Eiffel Tower. Walt wanted to give folks something to look at while they were waiting in line. Of course, he had hoped that this would be the wonderful mobiles of the Tower of the Four Winds, but since that was a moot point, he had Rolly design something new. What Rolly came up with was stunning. It was a fanciful clock tower with a rotating face that acted as a type of pendulum. Every 15 minutes, the clock would perform the time in a most spectacular way. The clock would come to life with animated props and figures, and it finished by showing the time as a bell tolls to the count of the hour down to the quarter. If you haven't seen this in person, it's worth a quick stop to watch. The facade itself has the appearance of motion as the golden florets and spinners rotate and glisten in the sunlight. Not to mention, watching the trains of the Disneyland Railroad pass between the structures of the facade is a truly delightful sight. And speaking of the railroad, since they had to move the tracks, Fantasyland would be without a train depot until the 1980s. It's a Small World opened at Disneyland on May 28, 1966, 2 years after it debuted at the New York World's Fair. The opening day ceremonies were quite grand. You can really see how this attraction must have meant a lot for Walt. There was a massive parade down Main Street, making its way to It's a Small World, and Walt Disney was seen driving his electric runabout. When the festivities reached Small World, everyone went to their positions. The camera crews and journalists were at the ready to document the opening ceremony. Here, a child from every major nation stood representing their homeland, dressed in their country's colors and singing along together with the theme song of It's a Small World. Then, waters from each of the 7 seas were poured into Small World's 7 Seaway, with Walt Disney finishing with a canteen containing the waters of America's major rivers. You could see the pure joy in his eyes as he ceremoniously had done what others had considered an impossible dream, bringing together the children of the world. And the crowning touch of the whole ceremony was the launching of dozens of white doves and thousands of colorful balloons into the sky as the boatloads of children took the first voyage through this wonderful attraction. It's a Small World has become one of the most popular and well-known songs and rides across the globe. It is said that this song is always playing somewhere on Earth. At any given time, the message this attraction sends to the people of the world is one of love, prosperity, kindness, and togetherness, a message that is often forgotten in today's society. It's a Small World has changed very little since it opened at Disneyland, and when the attraction was brought here, the ride length was increased by several minutes. The ride at the World's Fair was anywhere from 7 to 9 minutes long, while the one at Disneyland is anywhere from 12 to 15 minutes long. It contains over 300 animatronic dolls, over 250 toys, and about 80 animated props. The stairs where guests exit today used to be where guests entered the loading area, but in the 1980s they reversed the direction of travel because the long exit ramps were better equipped for queuing people up than the short stairway entrance. In 1997, Disney began doing yearly Christmas overlays to the ride, dubbing it It's a Small World Holiday. This move was done to bring more offerings to the park for the holiday season, as well as increase the ride's attendance during that time of year. Today, It's a Small World Holiday is one of the most popular attractions during Christmas time, especially when the attraction is lit up at night in thousands of colorful, sparkling lights. The facade has been touched up and repainted several times over the years. Once in a while, it sports a different color scheme. For instance, in the 1980s, the facade was painted in shades of pink and blue. However, the biggest changes came when the attraction went down for a major refurbishment in 2008. The original indoor portion of the flume had to be replaced. After years of fatigue and constant patching, it had to go. So a brand new flume was built for it. The outdoor portion was made of concrete, however, and so Imagineers just rebuilt it. There was another major issue that needed to be addressed: the boats. The original boats from the World's Fair, which were still in use up until 2008, were made of a steel frame encased in a fiberglass shell. This was part of the reason the boats lasted so long, actually. The steel was quite strong and the fiberglass could always be patched up and repaired no matter how many times it got damaged. But the materials were extremely heavy, which combined with its increasingly heavy passengers made the boats less buoyant over the years. There was also the fact that sometimes the boats tilted so dramatically it was hard to stay seated, and on rare occasion, if it tilted enough, the boat would swamp itself. Imagineers replaced the boats with an entirely new set made of an aluminum frame surrounded by heavy-duty plastic. These boats are so buoyant that even when filled with heavy passengers, they still sit well above the waterline. They are also slightly narrower, which solved the issue of tilting when the boats backed up at the loading area. During this refurbishment came the most controversial change of this ride's history: the addition of 29 Disney characters dispersed throughout the ride. Imagineer Kim Irvine, who is arguably one of the last connections to the first generation of Imagineers, was tasked with refurbishing Small World. The company wanted her to incorporate the characters, a move which brought outrage to the fans and could have ended her career at Disney. Thankfully, she pulled through the hard times and has continued to preserve the aspects about Disneyland we love the most. For those of you wondering why the characters are such a big deal to the fan community, you have to look at the message of It's a Small World. It's about community, togetherness, and peace. Muddying up this message with fanciful movie characters is counterproductive. It's distracting from the message. While people may complain that the song is annoying and repetitive, or that it's some kind of kiddie ride, that hasn't stopped the ride from garnering 45 to 60-minute wait times. It's been experienced by more than 350 million guests from around the world since it opened at Disneyland in 1966. And this year, It's a Small World celebrates 60 years since its opening at the World's Fair in 1964. It's a Small World is a classic Disneyland attraction. It beams out a message so simple and so direct that it transcends time and generations, showing that people can come together if they just remember that differences, that diversity, are what makes the human race strong. Richard Sherman, the writer of the song, said the key words in the lyric is "after all." It's a small world after all. Walt Disney wasn't the racist, sexist, anti-Semite that social media often makes him out to be. He wasn't a saint either. He was the product of his generation, but he didn't let the past define him. Walt Disney didn't hate women. Some of the top creative people he appointed at Imagineering were women, such as Mary Blair and Alice Davis. Walt wasn't anti-Semitic either. Many of the people who designed and built Disneyland were Jewish. Walt was even awarded Man of the Year by the Jewish organization B'nai B'rith in 1955. The Sherman brothers were Jewish as well, and to quote Richard Sherman, Walt was sensitive to people's feelings. He hated to see people mistreated or discriminated against. While Walt Disney was alive, he even had gay men who worked in the company, and Walt even defended a gay man at the studio when he was being harassed by police. The Disney studio was also one of the first to hire a black animator, Floyd Norman, who was handpicked by Walt Disney himself. Floyd Norman said about Walt Disney, "He didn't have any prejudices. If you were a good person, he liked you. Simple as that." While Walt was alive, everyone, no matter your race, religion, or background, was welcome at Disneyland. All that is to say why Walt took great pride in this attraction, and why, despite the effects of cancer starting to slow him, he pushed hard to open It's a Small World at Disneyland. It's because it is the epitome of the sentiments that he carried during his whole career as an entertainer. It represents the very purpose of Disneyland itself. It's a reminder that we're all in this together. In the final chapter of Walt Disney's life, just months before his passing in December 1966, he shared a message that the ride is still beaming out 6 decades later. Cherish and love one another, because, after all,
It's a small world.